one of the things that is really important to understand is that AI is a tool. It's not a panacea. And I think oftentimes companies mistake and think that being competitive means acquiring AI.
Hello. Welcome to International Business Today, our podcast on international business, where we discuss current global business issues that we think are of considerable importance and continuing importance to practitioners, to students, and to academics who are interested in learning more about different aspects of international business. My guest today is Professor Nada Saunders, a distinguished professor here at the mckim School of Business at Northeastern University, and she specializes in global supply chains. She has a PhD from Ohio State, an undergraduate degree in engineering, and she consults for a variety of Fortune 500 companies such as Dell, Nike, AT&T, and others. She teaches here for us in the MBA program and executive programs, and she's lectured and done a number of training programs across many companies and at many universities. She's the co-editor of Production and Operations Management, one of the leading journals in this field, aimed at academics, but of considerable utility to operations researchers and technically oriented managers who work in supply chains. Nada, welcome. I'm really pleased to have you here today. And I think everyone talks about global supply chains. So I'm going to start off by asking you a very simple question. Could you define what you mean by global supply chains?
Well, first, thank you for having me, Ravi, and I think this is a really important topic. I think there is a really big misconception of what a supply chain is. I think most people assume that it's a flow of products in a very simple way, and actually from a very simplistic standpoint, that is the case. Companies make a product, they ship it, refine it, deliver it to where you and I can buy it. So if you got Starbucks this morning and you had your cup of coffee, well, that coffee started out as a pile of coffee beans, say in Guatemala with a farmer, and it was picked and it was put in burlap bags and taken to a ship, and it was shipped to a roastery, perhaps in Seattle, and so forth. But that is actually very simple. It's an overly simplistic view. First of all, you have products going in one direction, in this example, coffee. But as you and I know, no one ships anything for free. So we also have money going in the other direction. So you have the flow of products. You have the flow of money. You also have information. Information is absolutely critical. Where is the coffee? How much of it? Is it on a barge? Is it delayed in the port of LA, as we have all heard? And then on top of that, you have labor. We have all heard about everything from, rail worker issues, truck driver issues. So really, a supply chain is managing this flow of products, money, information, and labor in both directions. On top of that, the example that I gave is really overly simplistic. If we take any product that is even a little more complex, that supply chain, that flow gets really complicated. If you take, for example, Apple. Apple has suppliers in 43 countries. And if you take, say, an iPhone that we all use, right? Just one chip that goes into the iPhone. It's designed in California. It is made in Taiwan, sent to the Philippines to be tested, then sent to China to be added to the iPhone. So tracking a product's components becomes really, really difficult. So managing what has become a really hyper-connected, hyper-complex global network of movements of products, money, information, and people is really what we're talking about when it comes to global supply chains.
So when you talk about global supply chains as being systems, Is this what you mean, that these are the various elements?
Yes, and it is actually extremely important to look at it as a system. If you look at the supply chain itself or any enterprise, the functions that we have is we buy, we make, we move, and sell. And I'm actually using business lingo. It's easy to understand, but I buy stuff, components. I do something with them to make it. I transport, I sell it. This, of course, are the functions of marketing, purchasing, operations, transportation. The issue, the problems arise when we really separate them and don't look at them connected. So, and we've actually seen many examples of companies not doing well that might sell or promise that they're going to be able to deliver something, but not connect that to what they're able to make or what they're able to buy as far as components and fail. So the supply chain is a system, and we have to look at it as a system and make sure that the throughput, the goods that are flowing through, flow smoothly and not just optimize one function.
So, what is the strategic significance and the strategic impact of a well-run global supply chain?
Well, I think it's huge. And so we've had supply chains forever. It was something that most people did not think about because they just went and they bought their stuff, right? Or they pressed the button on their computer and Amazon delivered it. And then COVID came along and made us realize what the strategic importance of this is in this scenario where we basically had a prolonged period of demand supply stoppage on both sides and what happened to the collapse of this. I think really companies were aware of the importance of this, but COVID opened the eyes. And I would say that a lot of people in the field, CEOs, executives that I talk to, will say, as far as the function, it has put us in the limelight, and it has made the C-suite aware of why we have to manage this. And this is really important because, Ravi, before COVID, I would say recent surveys even showed that about 65% of companies could not see beyond their tier one suppliers. And tier one is the person that I buy from. So if I'm buying from you, you're my tier one. Now you're buying from somebody who's buying from somebody else and so forth. The problem with that, think about it, 65% can't see beyond that. Most problems, like chip shortages, they lie, well, tier 5, tier 6. I cannot, as a company, assess my risk exposure if I cannot see who you're sourcing from and who you're sourcing from sources from, and how far are they, what are their risks, what is their exposure. So all of this, COVID, has put us, the function, in the limelight. And I guess I am hoping that in the long run that we end up functioning in a much more improved way.
So, Nada, it sounds like going from layer 1 all the way down to layer 6, the visibility that you need. Maybe technology has a really important role to play in supply chains. Do you want to comment on that?
It has a huge role. And in fact, without it, we cannot function. So I think that advancements in technology, Internet of Things, RFID, all the data, they have enabled us to really function better. So I think as we see these advancements, we're going to see improvements. But that's also where some of the problems lie, because we are having so many events occur. Technology works off of historical data. It is absolutely amazing to improve production processes, eliminate waste, improve efficiency. But I think when it comes to context, we also need to have people to overlay on top of that. Having said that, we are seeing companies embrace technology very quickly, especially in the post-COVID era. One of the things that I can tell you in my own work, I think a big mistake, and companies are still doing this, is to look at technology as a plug-and-play solution, where they say, oh, competition is investing in X, we have to invest in X. And the reason for that is that each company has to develop their own business model and be aware of what it is, and then acquire and adapt and adopt technology to their own organization.
Now, Nada, you have a lot of experience, obviously, in areas like predictive analytics, in forecasting, in risk management. What are the How do these different specialties, if you will, play a role in helping keep global supply chains functioning effectively and efficiently?
Thank you for asking. So my work is pretty unique in that my background is originally in forecasting with an operations PhD. And the difference in that is that I understand how prediction actually works. Most people that do that, that's kind of where they stop. But I know how to translate that into building a business and its ecosystem to respond to whatever that forecast is going to be. So I know how the two should work in tandem. Having said that, we are now at a time period where the interval to respond is shorter and shorter. We have more and more data, which is good in one respect, but it's also not so good. One of the things that has always been a pet peeve of mine, even before we got into the whole big data area, is the data clean? How reliable is the data? And I can tell you in my experience, I have many times seen a PowerPoint presentation go up where I know the data was not clean. And somehow there's a magic when you see it on a PowerPoint. I think we have to be extraordinarily careful that the technology and the algorithms that are being used are applied to data that has been cleansed. And I think that that is going to be a problem that is going to be, increasingly so as we get more and more data. At the same time, then, we need to structure our enterprises in order to quickly respond to what the data is showing. And there are certainly techniques that we've used. Scenario planning is definitely a very important one here, where basically, rather than having an event forecast that we're trying to make, we have alternative scenarios that we're predicting, and then we develop the way we would respond and structure our organization in a way that could respond to any one of those. And we update that on an ongoing basis. So the two working together, I think, is more important than ever now. Structure the enterprise in response to what the data is showing and do it in this evolving kind of a way.
Now, just being around, you hear a lot about AI.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that CEOs, boards are all talking about AI as top of their share of mind. So, given what you've just been talking about in terms of integrating the structure of the organization and the data, could AI play a role in making supply chains better for a company that really understands AI?
Yes, and we see it across the board. I mean, we're seeing the use of AI in terms of being able to query the data. I think one of the things that is really important to understand is that AI is a tool. It's not a panacea. And I think oftentimes companies mistake and think that being competitive means acquiring AI. AI is very important. Companies that are AI driven know how to mine the data and use it. But ultimately, they know how to integrate their experts, people in the company, with that data. And when we look at it, my work has been in the integration of the human element with AI. And I have to tell you, when I went into this, I was all about the technology. As you had noted, even my background is in engineering, so I was fairly quantitative in the early start. It was only with working with companies that I understood that its executives managers who have context, who then can take this information from AI and then use their judgment to be able to decide what is a false alarm, what should we consider. And there's a whole study in terms of advantages that humans bring that AI does not, and vice versa. So AI is marvelous in mining huge amounts of data. It is precise. It doesn't get tired like you and I, right? Humans, well, we're finicky and we get tired and so forth, but we are very, very good at being innovative, creative. If we look at some really marvelous things, innovations, the Post-it notes. I mean, all of these innovations, saccharin, the Slinky that made a lot of money, they all came about from humans being able to connect disparate ideas and things together. AI cannot do that. And the more data that we have, we've heard this data is biased oftentimes because it is just historical data that's been mined. The marriage of the two, the marriage of the human element, somebody who has experience, who understands their industry with the AI is key.
Now, you'd mentioned scenario planning a while back, and I was thinking that clearly one of the most defining events of the last 2 or 3 years has been the COVID pandemic, and then subsequently all of us emerging out of it. So I imagine that had a huge impact on supply chains. What is your take on the impact it had and what we learned from it?
It has such, thank you for asking. It has actually had a huge impact. I would say that we are seeing some massive shifts now in what companies are doing precisely because of it. I actually had a piece that came out in the conversation in January that simply looked at what have companies been doing. One of the things that we are seeing is this trend towards reshoring or friendshoring. So one of the problems that had happened over the decades and years is companies outsourcing. We were all aware of that. That basically meant is sourcing production operations to areas globally that had cheaper labor. But the problem with that obviously meant that we were dependent on shipments, we were dependent on geopolitics. COVID shut all that down. We are seeing more and more companies trying to bring as much manufacturing supply closer to home. So that is one of the trends that we are seeing. We are also seeing companies carry a little bit more inventory. Prior to COVID, there was definitely this push towards just-in-time inventories. I'm somebody that used to train companies on just-in-time. I'm a real believer in just-in-time. And I am seeing companies trying to jettison it, which I think is a big mistake. But I think bringing in some caveats to that is a smart way to do it. So you look at your inventories, and maybe for some items that are very critical or very risky, you carry a little bit more inventory. Overall, we are seeing companies that are now carrying a little more inventory. So bringing production closer to home where possible, carrying a little more inventory, and the last item was actually investing in tech.
You're a forecasting expert, right?
Yes.
And you mentioned how forecasting and technology in general relies on historic data.
Yeah.
And then I think something like COVID happens or the war in Ukraine, and these are probably difficult to forecast, I would imagine, but these are what people call black swan events. So how does someone who's in charge of global supply chains take into account the possibility of a black swan event, even though they don't know what it might be?
It's a great question. So I really think that today, post-COVID, we're really much at a tipping point in terms of what the world looks like. And I agree with you, COVID was a black swan. But I think that we've had many black swans. And so we basically have had this cluster, if you will. And I think because we're so globally connected with so many events going on, that I think that we need to understand as companies and scholars in terms of the work that we are doing, that this is what the future is going to hold. I think prior to COVID, companies operated in with an assumption that there were blue sky. We had blue sky events, things ran smoothly. Then sometimes a black swan event occurred, a tsunami, a hurricane, an earthquake, and then, we went back to normal after a few weeks. I think it is really important for companies to recognize that we are now in a very different time period with many black swans. They're all different, but they are hitting company after company. If we look at geopolitics, Ukraine war, we look at the economic, financial global picture, climate change, we could just go on and on. As companies are being hit, what's happening, Robbie, is they don't have time to bounce back from one hazard to another. I believe very strongly that companies and scholars like us and the kind of work that we're doing, we need to help companies develop new business models in order to be able to bounce back much more quickly as they continue to be hit with one black swan and then another. And I think that just merely saying, oh, this is, once in a lifetime event, I think it is really naive because we have to look at the various hazards, their probabilities, chances of occurrence, and where we are today.
So I think what you're talking about is resilience, right?
Absolutely.
So is resilience, can you build resilience into global supply chains?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there are many ways to do that. I had already mentioned developing new business models. That is without question. So I think prior to COVID, we saw companies really doing a lot of offshoring, but doing it from one geography. So what we saw was certain geographic areas specialize, China in tech, and so forth. What companies are doing and need to be doing is to diversify where they source from as a first step. They have to have alternative sources. They cannot rely on one or a few sources. They have to build extra capacity. They, up to this point, or prior to COVID, they really had not done that. They were really primarily concerned about churning or getting goods through the system, keeping efficiency high, costs low, just-in-time deliveries. What is really needed now is a little extra slack. So we need a very different kind of a system, a shorter supply chains that has more slack in it. Now, that is going to have consequences that people don't want to hear about, but it will. Consumers, me and you, we're all used to pressing the button, Amazon delivers it. We have choices of products at a very low cost. As companies evolve, I think we're going to see higher prices in the long run, fewer choices, more delays, but I think we're going to be able to deliver.
Now, you're a consultant, among other things, and there are a lot of industries that are probably highly affected by global supply chains and this issue of resilience. So do you want to talk, for example, about, say, fast fashion? Companies like Zara, H&M, Shein, how they approach this issue of having efficient supply chains and also build resilience into it?
It's a great question. I think the fast fashion model is something that we marveled at prior to COVID. And that is a model that really is driven by data technology. It implements the best principles of just-in-time or lean. It really violates the kinds of things that we've seen in fashion over the years, pioneered by, say, Zara, H&M. But I think what's interesting is that Shein then comes in to play, and we're actually seeing different business models in what appears to be one industry, one segment, but there are these nuances. And actually, Zara on the one spectrum, Shein on the other, are actually fundamentally different. They are both driven by data, but they use it differently. Shein relies heavily on social media platforms, on influencers, on streetwear, if you will, what people are talking about. Shein doesn't really care what Vogue is showing in the magazines or what's happening on the runway. Zara came out with the whole idea that they would copy runway. So Zara is vertically integrated. Shein is not. I mean, Shein basically, you place the order, it has third parties, and it uses what's called drop shipping. It essentially takes those orders and then delivers to customers using only an online platform. Zara is really different, and we are seeing within the fast fashion segment, data-driven, but the business model's different, evolving, and that also means price points are also evolving, with Shein really pushing that price point down. And Zara, and I'm saying this in real time and looking at what's kind of happening right now, kind of moving into sort of at the higher end of fast fashion. And H&M kind of staying kind of in the middle. And we'll see kind of what happens, and they're all kind of neck and neck at this point. But it's definitely a model that is data-driven, completely data-driven.
And in supply chains, people often talk about China as the world's factory. And at the same time, China completely shut down the country for 2 years because of COVID.
Yeah.
So that's a geopolitical development. And I think similarly, recently, President Biden had this bill which provided huge subsidies for semiconductors, provided they brought back research and manufacturing to the U.S. or to what you call the friendshoring.
Yeah.
So how do you factor in these geopolitical issues in a supply chain strategy?
They're actually huge, and I think what we've seen, obviously, with the bill that has been passed. I mean, Intel investing multi-billion dollars to build the complex, which is for me personally exciting. PhD from Ohio State, Columbus, Ohio, trying to make it the next Silicon Valley, which I think for all of us in the U.S. at least, it's going to be really important because chips are something that we need for everything: appliances, automobiles, everything. And that is something that I think being able to bring production back is very important. Some of the latest numbers that I've seen, I believe imports from China are down since August of 2022, about 21%. So we are seeing a shift. We are seeing companies, Apple most notably, also now moving to India, moving to Vietnam to do some manufacture there, recognizing that they cannot be dependent on China. But I think on the bigger picture, we're seeing that a big shift in, the world is flat as we used to talk about. I don't think it's that flat anymore. I think it is, that's really changing and shifting, and understanding that geopolitics are playing a huge, huge role. Tariffs, import quotas, all of that. And it is extraordinarily volatile that I think companies are simply aware. I think the big problem with companies is they do tend to be short-sighted. So they're oftentimes very reactive, but I think they're waking up to the fact that this is what the future is going to be like. Let's not put all our eggs in one basket as we did prior to COVID. And geopolitics is a very important part of that.
Now, in strategy, we often talk about stakeholders influencing strategy. And who are the key stakeholders in a supply chain? And do they tend to pull supply chain decision-making in conflicting directions?
I think it's a great question, and the answer to the last part of it is certainly, of course. There's boards and shareholders, and obviously they're going to look at bottom line profitability and things like that. Customers are certainly a huge component of that. We want to keep the market share. We saw what happens to companies that have lost market share that didn't have enough inventory. And there is some conflict there just by the mere fact that companies used just in time to carry very little inventory. From a shareholder standpoint, the books financials looked really good because we were very efficient from a financial P&L standpoint. But so we have a lot of inventory, have a lot of inventory cost. But when COVID hit, what happened? Companies that did not have excess inventory lost customers that went elsewhere. So there is some conflict there. But as far as who are the various stakeholders, certainly customers, boards. But I think we have to look at the broader ecosystem, our suppliers, our partners, the various entities that we partner with. All of them are entities we are accountable. And I think that is really important.
Now, when I think of stakeholders, I think of employees.
Absolutely.
People, human talent. So what is your take on the centrality or the importance of human talent in this broad area of managing supply chains to be resilient and to be effective and efficient?
I think it's absolutely huge. When we began our research that had culminated into the book Hugh Machine, we actually went into hundreds of companies trying to look at all the wonderful things that AI can do. One of the things that happened is we learned every single company told us that the secret to making it work was talent. It really was about having your employees happy, satisfied, productive, hiring the best people, treating them well, investing in your people. We've certainly talked a lot about that with Humanics, Northeastern here, and investing in people through lifelong learning, giving them skills that they can work with AI and technology. I think that that is absolutely essential and it's critical. There is not a single company that we spoke with that did not say that people were the number one scarce resource and precious resource for them to function. So I think it is something that I think oftentimes companies lose sight of. And we have seen this, I think, especially over this past year. We heard about the truck driver shortages and various negotiations, rail workers. Most recently, we have seen layoffs in the tech sector. I think companies that do not treat their employees well are extraordinarily short-sighted. And I think it's a very big mistake.
So if I understand you correctly, the layoffs that are happening now in tech will come to hurt them in terms of affecting negatively how well their supply chains are run.
I actually really think so. And I think, because we had mentioned the different hazards that are going on, geopolitics, economics, cybersecurity. We need tech people. I mean, cyber is a really critical aspect as we communicate, across the various enterprises. We need people that are skilled, that are motivated. I think morale, passion, creativity, those are all things we have to foster. I really do believe that, one of the things that we are as humans, we are emotional. And I think when layoffs are looming, where people are afraid, they're less productive. And I think it's very short-sighted. I think it's going to hurt the companies in the long run. And again, I think it's extremely short-sighted.
Fascinating. This has been really a great conversation. Thank you very much. Do you have any sort of summary thoughts for what are the big picture 2 or 3 major issues or concepts that our audience should retain and think about?
Great question. I think multiple things. And as you know, Ravi, I could talk about this for a long time. And thank you so much for having me. I think as far as workers are concerned, at every level. And I tell my students this too. You see workers saying, well, they want more pay and so forth. I have said this: ask for reskilling, ask for employers to pay for you to have some kind of training and go back to school. Because what's happening is technology is evolving so quickly that the job that you currently have, that you're holding now, that job is going to look different. So I think just like employers are very short-sighted, laying off labor, employees are short-sighted by asking for money. And I have said this over the past year. Every worker should ask for reskilling so they can stay in their profession and be prepared to work with the new technology. The other aspect that I think is extremely important as companies acquire technology, to think about acquiring it looking at their enterprise and their supply chain as a system. I see this time and time again, where you invest a lot in technology on the marketing end, or technology a lot in, say, the procurement end, but what happens is the pieces don't communicate. So what you end up having is these optimized silos, but nevertheless silos. The consequences are you still cannot get the product where you want it, when you want it.
Fascinating, and thank you again, Nada.
You're
I've
so
enjoyed
welcome.
this conversation, and thank you for taking the time, and our audience. So I'd like to say goodbye. Hope you enjoyed that chat with Nada. Her new book that's coming out in fall, I believe, is called Human Machine 2.0, Human Machine. It's a portmanteau word, and I think the subtitle is AI, Human Talent, and the Super Intelligent Enterprise. So please look for it someday. And thank you very much. We'll see you again at our next episode of International Business Today.